Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.Cutuli, and we are here today for episode number 26 of the Mental Insights Podcast with Catherine Townsend-Lyon. Catherine is the author of Addicted to Dimes, Confessions of a Liar and a Cheat, and also 10 the Hard Way. They are both available online, which I'll provide through the show notes below. Catherine faced many challenges and experiences throughout mental health and addiction. Specifically, she experienced a gambling addiction that really caused a lot of trauma and troubles throughout her time. She now is an advocate through her recovery blog, through her books. She advocates through any speaking, throughout podcasts, or throughout any events, and as well article writing throughout a lot of her mental health challenges and gambling addiction. Catherine provides a real raw conversation with me to explain more about any of the misconceptions, what she faced throughout these issues, and what she used herself in order to bring out a better self and a better life for her throughout what she has faced in her life. Catherine provides such an honest and open conversation with me, and I really hope you all enjoy this episode of the Mental Insights Podcast. Thank you all for listening to this episode. So thank you, Catherine, for being here today. We have episode number 26 of the Mental Insights Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you on, Catherine. Thank you for being here today.
And thank you for the invite. I'm always happy to share my message.
I'm so grateful to hear that, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. At the really beginning of most of my interviews, I like to ask my guests this question because I think it really encompasses the stepping stones of what we're about to speak about. The question being, when did you realize that mental health was a priority in your life?
Well, I believe it really all started. I got entangled in gambling addiction, and when I had my very first, I guess you could say, downfall, I was actually suffering severe mental health disorders at the same time as my gambling addiction, and I had way crossed into the line of addicted gambling. It was full-blown addiction, and it brought out symptoms that I probably, as my doctor and my psychiatrist at the time at the crisis center, I had been suffering some of them since childhood. I'm a childhood sex abuse survivor, and had a lot of trauma. Then, from that trauma, very hypersensitive to parental discipline and such. And so, we take a lot of that in when we do have mental health challenges. We're a little more hypersensitive to, being yelled at or, things that go on in the home. But yeah, it was my gambling addiction in 2002, and I was suffering at the time with PTSD, severe depression. At the time, we weren't sure what it was, if it was actual bipolar with, because the gambling, you're in such an obsessed state, very high mania, that, it took quite a while, several months, to get a proper diagnosis once I got into treatment for the gambling addiction. So we were kind of combating them both at the same time. But it was November of 2002, my 50th birthday, and here I was in a addiction and mental health crisis center from a suicide attempt. And it was not my last suicide attempt. And so that's where I was actually finally properly diagnosed with the mental health challenges that I have today.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. I really appreciate it and giving a little bit of insight into what you've been able to overcome thus far. I think it's definitely an important topic to speak about the process of being diagnosed because, as you said, misdiagnosis can happen throughout, you seeking out resources. So why don't you speak more about that process, and especially because you were facing a multitude of challenges, not only within mental health, but within gambling addiction. Why don't you speak about, the challenges that you faced through handling those both together and dealing with being diagnosed and how that played a role into your own mental health and how you were going about your day?
Well, the second suicide attempt that I speak of that actually happened in 2006, and that was a direct effect. I had been a couple years into my recovery from gambling addiction. What I find and what I was learning when I first started my treatment program for gambling, and of course, they refer you to do many things. Gamblers Anonymous was one. I knew that my gambling was so bad that I needed anything and everything that I could do to help myself. But sitting in the rooms, as far as the addiction, we were hearing, and I was hearing more and more of, we call it being duly diagnosed, and don't get it confused with, dual addiction. Being duly diagnosed, which is what I am, you maintain recovery from it, and any addiction, and you have to maintain and well manage your mental health. So when you have both at the same time, it can be even, more difficult because you have so much more work to do. So when I was still in the crisis center for my suicide attempt and started in the program the first time, I was in for a little over 20, almost 28 days. And of course, coming from the hospital into the crisis center, it takes a good week, to get the person, managed, so that you can then, within the next couple weeks of being in the center, I started my treatment for the gambling, but we were also diagnosing properly. You got to get out of that manic state, so that a person can be properly, diagnosed with having, the gambling. Of course, a lot of that high mania. At first, they thought I had bipolar, full-blown bipolar, but it wasn't. It was from the gambling. The gambling has you in such a obsessive, high mania state all the time. Even when you walk away from a machine, that doesn't mean that the addiction, you're done. It's not. There's so much more, of course, that goes into that, the lying, the hiding, it was exhausting to be an addicted gambler. So then we moved into, I had a full brain scan. We did, full workup, medical, blood work and testing and evaluation and that. And so before I left, they had started me on a medication program, and but what ended up having me back, in suicidal state, and that I wasn't gambling, but I had I stopped taking my meds. And so that's why one of the medications they had me on, that was one of the main medications, I think it was, I'm trying to remember if it was Effexor or one of these others, and it stopped working. And it is known to do that. Well, I just figured at that time, I still couldn't wrap my mind around that I had mental health problems. And a lot of that came from the stigma. Stigma is still so prevalent. And that's why, what you do, and through my advocacy and sharing my story, it's important. We need to shatter the stigma around mental health. I look at it just like mental health, just like I do my addiction. We have to continue to get out there and live our lives. But I maintain my recovery and my mental health like I do any other disease. I mean, it's a medical, emotional, and mental problem, but it's a disease. I mean, it's still an illness. So, when people have diabetes or heart disease, what do? They do the things their doctor tells them. You take your medications, check your blood sugar, you do all these things, but you continue to live life. It can't just be all about, my recovery, or all about just, oh, I have mental health issues. I can't do this. I can't do that. I do suffer still from agoraphobia. So no, I don't get out as much as I wish I could. And that's why it's important for me to advocate and do, shows and raise awareness like yours, because we need to shatter the stigma around mental health. It's way overdue. And so, yes, when my scan came back, my pleasure and reward and energy and portion of the chemicals in my brain were depleted. So they added me on to Wellbutrin for 2 years to get that boosted and start remaking the chemical. Several other areas in the brain. So yes, the mental health, and if you have addiction, they have to be evaluated properly, because we already know the problems that people have when they are diagnosed with any type of mental health problems or disorders. It's like being a guinea pig, trying to get the right medications and the right, therapy. I mean, everything. And the first hurdle you have to get over is knowing it's okay to have these. Everybody has some form of problem, whether it's just depression or anxiety, or being well managed. Make your appointments if you go through a behavioral center. Take your meds properly. These are all important things that have to work together. But then you continue to go out and you live your life. You have to stay well managed, because in 2006, I had this. My mind was just stuck on, I just want to be normal. Well, what really is normal? In today's society, especially, high pressure jobs and stress and that. And so that's what got me back to suicidal, and my second suicide attempt had nothing to do with the gambling. It was all my mental health. And it was because I wasn't managed. I wasn't well managed. I stopped taking my meds. I wasn't making my appointments. And within 2 weeks, I spun out of control.
Thank you for
And
sharing.
then, yeah, I had to regroup and, get back on track. So
Definitely, yeah. You brought up some great points, and I think that one being, the routines that we need to be in are so vital, whether it's taking your medication, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's, making sure you're eating the right foods. There's a lot of factors that, if we mismanage, can definitely drastically affect the way that we think and behave and act. So it's definitely such an important figure, and it relates a lot to what you're speaking about originally, being, the environment. And I'd love to ask you more about that, because I think it's definitely such a valuable aspect within your life is, for yourself, when you were facing these challenges, how were you able to change your environment and change the way you saw yourself in order to make the positive steps forward within your life?
Well, I think a lot of the things that you had just touched upon, you just have to come to terms, and quite frankly, I really utilized the counseling and the therapy that I was receiving. Of course, I was having to work with a psychiatrist, and that, and you're right. It's when we need to learn to, and of course, because I had to also do this for maintaining my recovery. Yeah, we have to change the thinking. That was probably one of the biggest hurdles for me, because it does, once you change the habit, your thinking, the habits change, how you look at um, your life and everything. That goes hand in hand. It will then begin to open up and make you understand that this isn't this isn't what life is going to be. And I think there too, again, I always say raising that awareness, because these labels, people get too stuck on labels, and oh, she's got mental health, or she's got depression, or she's got this. Well, we know how serious that just a depression alone, and then if you end up mixing it with alcohol, or a drug or something, we've already seen so many high profile people pass away just from depression. So it is serious, and that, but I think for me it was doing the combination of everything, especially after my second suicide attempt. I needed to just understand that, and it's hard to explain the approach because it all kind of had to work together. But it was, getting out more, taking walks, getting exercise, get fresh air, talk with other people, who also have mental health challenges. That really helps, because then you feel that you're not isolated, you're not alone. There's so many people out there who have mental health challenges, and speaking with other people, like-minded people, that actually understand. um do take your medications properly and take them, because a lot of times, even in media and in society, I can tell you a direct effect. The Las Vegas shooting, the mass shooting. A lot of these shootings, if you go through and you read all these high profile, probably more than half of them are because people had either undiagnosed mental health disorders, or they were diagnosed but they stopped taking their medications, or stopped seeing their psychiatrists and doctors. I feel that your medical health and your mental and emotional health are all combined. And so you have to take care of yourself 100%. Make your appointments. It's, I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to explain because, I'm 12 years in now. So, both from maintaining recovery and, with my mental health. And I just, for me, the key was don't get hooked up on, what people think or say about others who have mental health problems. Don't buy into the stigma or the labels, and manage, stay well managed, do what you can, whether it be diet, exercise, get out there, advocate, share your story. You don't know how many people you can help. That one person may change their mind because they're suffering, and decide to go and reach out and finally get some help. I am very adamant on raising awareness. And but yeah, it's really, I think for me the stigma was really one of the biggest hurdles, to get over. And the stigma and the labeling, it just breaks my heart. And we see it all over. We see it on the internet. We see it in groups, in social media. And it just breaks my heart because, people, we read these things and it's like, where is the empathy or the understanding? Is it really just, if it doesn't affect you or your family, that you're just going to not want to know about it, or just, out of sight, out of mind? If it doesn't affect somebody else, then they feel it doesn't touch them. And I just think that's just heartbreaking to me.
Totally. I completely agree, Catherine. It's something that I think, hopefully these conversations can continue to open people's eyes, because unfortunately, like you were saying, people who aren't affected from it don't show a lot of support, but when it does affect someone within their family or their, close social ties, it truly awakens them, and they could have been more prepared, say, if they were aware of it a few years ago or a few months ago. So hopefully we can continue to bring that out. And it also relates to what you were speaking about earlier, is continue to have your checkups. It seems like there's still such a lack of care within the mental health field, because
Oh,
look at
yeah.
it, when you grow up, you are allowed to have physicals, you're allowed to have checkups, this, that, and the other, but no
All the
one.
preventative care measures out there for medical, make sure you have your physical and that. Well, why aren't they advocating that for mental and emotional,
Exactly.
health as well? And especially in, like I said, in the society we live in and the world we live in today is very stressful, is very negative, and that, I feel they need to be hand in hand. It should just be a norm for, come in for your yearly medical, physical, and mental health wellness check, and that can start, with our own Department of Health, starting in Washington, and that it should just be the normal that, you need to go, it's time for your medical and mental health wellness checkup. I feel they need to be together. It shouldn't be separated. And I do feel that's where some of the stigma comes from, because really they are. Your physical medical health is separate from your emotional and your emotional and mental health well-being. Shouldn't they be together? Instead of being separated.
I completely agree, Catherine. It's mind
Mhm.
blowing, because you look at the way that we care for physical injuries compared to mental injuries, and just the lack of support for
Yep.
mental health is, it's truly unbearable. And it doesn't make sense to me that, I think, within the US, I believe that it's like, we have maybe like 1 to 20 ratio of mental health professionals to people who are experiencing a mental health condition. So we're
Correct.
really
Yeah.
lacking.
And when you say that, you're that is general public, that's the general population. But what about all our vets coming back,
Exactly.
from Iraq, and then they end up homeless and wandering our streets with no help at all, because they obviously aren't getting it through the VA, and you know what? That starts at the top. That starts with our president, and part of that is, they think that we don't understand as voters and as electors that, we have still the power and the voice. But what ends up happening when something happens with government, the first things that they cut, the programs, is mental health, addiction,
Yeah.
school funding. You know what I mean? And so, it does have to begin at the top as well, and the mindset and the changing. It needs to start at the top, not from the bottom up. We have so many programs and foundations and people doing, really the government's work. I mean, I know that's probably a whole nother a whole nother interview, but
Definitely.
it is it does add to the problem of why everyone is not getting the proper help they need.
It's so true, Catherine. You're speaking right to me in what I believe. I
Mhm.
you bring it up because it people are definitely getting sick and tired of, the lack of care that we have. And I think that's definitely the one fortunate thing about technology and everything that we have today is we can still push these messages as much as we can to the people that can hear it, because unfortunately a lot of people do rely on that stigma to not seek out help. And hopefully some of these messages can reach their ears at the right time, until we can figure out this true
Yeah,
problem.
how to increase getting the help that they need. And that's kind of brings me back to what I was saying about now you have other, organizations, SAMHSA, and many of these others that are doing the work because our government has failed to do the work. And that's why you have a lot of these grassroots, advocates and foundations that are stepping up and trying to, fill in that gap. But the gap is so wide,
So
as far as, coming down to funding. And, not everybody can afford, um, um, just medical, let alone have mental health benefits. You're lucky if you have them when you are, from your employer. But even that I've seen change. My main career in my early years was through banking. And through those years, 20 plus years, I even seen that those, benefits of medical and mental health decline, on what they'll cover or pay. Some don't even offer mental health at all, just medical and dental. So, it's the whole landscape across the board needs to change. And this is one of the important things of why I speak out and I advocate. It's time. And it's just like with gambling addiction. It's the same thing, and that's why I advocate for both. Gambling is still so hush hush and a silent underground addiction. But yet, right now, it's the number one addiction, claiming lives by suicide. And that's over drugs and alcohol, And so, mental health is the same. It's still such a silent thing that people don't want to talk about it. And, for me, that's just in that's just wrong. It's wrong and inappropriate, and it's time that we shine a light on both, but especially mental health, because we have way too many of our veterans that have come home from the Iraq War and Afghanistan, and that my father is a Vietnam veteran, and I even remember and educated myself. Those guys came home too, and to what? Nothing, hardly, and that. So it's yeah, it needs to be the landscape needs to change, and the time is now to do this.
exactly,
So
you are so right. And you're hitting on all of the great subjects that are really experiencing all of these issues. The veterans, I think, is such an important topic because they, you know, provide so much time and effort and care and support for us to be able to do what we do, and then we
that's
don't
right. Yep.
provide resources for them when they come back, which is it's sad to see, and it definitely needs to be a big priority in how we welcome them and how we support them when they come back. That's
Yeah,
there's
because that's all part of all of our emotional, emotional stability, and I mean, these guys are coming home, and now they're suffering, and they feel alone. They feel isolated, like no one cares. about them. And, it's, the war's been over for a while, and now we're seeing them transition into being homeless, and can't hold a job, and, losing their families. And it's why? Because they're sick and they can't get help. It's just sad. It's just, it breaks. And it's like everybody at least knows somebody that was over there in Iraq or Afghanistan. It was such a long war, very similar to Vietnam, and these guys all came back, and some still coming back, and that, I know from Afghanistan, and they come home to what, the VA hardly they can barely get their medical covered properly from the VA. Then, even look at mental health, and that's really what these guys need.
Yeah, it's what they need most.
Right. So where is the priority? It seems like there isn't any. And, I know the government isn't going to solve everybody's problems, but look, these guys went over there and defended this country. So I feel, yes, it is the government's duty, to get them prepared. Well, they need to also give them the aftercare treatment they need when they come back.
Definitely, yeah. They need to be a top priority, especially
That's right.
because, we put so much money into them going out and defending, but we need that care afterwards as well, which I think, you make such a valuable point about.
But on a personal level, yeah, I would have to say that, that there too, for my, I think from my perspective, I really feel that, the stigma still and the labeling is really what hampers a lot of people from reaching out and getting help, just your regular general population. And of course, there again, the services, the treatment, and that also needs, we all know that needs to increase. But, it's just, heartbreaking to see people that won't reach out and get the help, even knowing it's available, because they don't want to be known as, a person who has mental illness, and it's also the way it's shared. I mean, even in media, I do a lot through, social media, but mainstream media. I mean, we watch, the national news and things like that. And, when it does cover like mental health and that, it's starting to pick up now. I mean, they are, but a lot of times it's always been negative, feedback, negative, and I really feel that's where a lot of that came from, and why people don't reach out. Look, I haven't talked to my father in probably 14 years, and I can tell you, the first time I had went home to visit, and had to take my meds and that, I made the mistake of taking my meds in front of my family. One morning I was drinking my coffee, taking my medications and whatever, and was asked, what are those for? And I went, oh no. And do you know, instantly they treated me different, like I was going to go postal or something. And that's just a perfect example of people just not wanting to understand, or listen, or, because I explained what it was and why, and I did a lot of research and tracing back, and I feel the depression and the severe depression, which I still have bouts with, it came from my mom's side of the family. And it was just speaking with my other relatives and my aunts and that, and knowing my mother was put on antidepressants like about the last 5 years of her life before she passed. and in '03. And so it's, I think part of it too is, look, I just turned 56 this year, and it's the way we're raised. We were raised that you don't bring shame to the family, or, you don't, and so if someone in your family has mental health issues, I mean, you don't talk about that. You don't talk about stuff like that outside the home, and so it's also, the way you're raised. We were never raised to know that it's okay to if something's wrong, to get help. And I feel that is also a factor.
Totally. You brought up some incredible points, about the stigma and why it's such a big proponent and why people seek out resources. I completely agree. The way that you were raised is such a big proponent. I spoke with a guest on my show. His name was Deepak Shukla, and he categorized it or compared it as his family was saying that it's basically in the top shelf of the cupboard. So he was saying that, mental health was something that his family didn't even consider. And I think that's what
Right.
people do today is, if someone says they have a mental health condition, they don't even relate to them as a person similar to themselves. They put them into a completely different category. And I think that's something that we need to change, about
Oh,
that.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, that has to change. Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, it's really too bad the way that people, perceive and, just think about the negativity that they think is surrounded around mental health. And, one thing that I've seen a lot, and I always bring it up with a lot of my guests because I think it's so valuable to talk about, is, the message that 1 in 5 people experience a mental health condition, but 5 in 5 people have mental health. So
Mhm.
saying that, we all have mental health. We all need to focus on our emotions, our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors. But, some people need more support. Some people need more awareness to benefit themselves and keep, the right chemical balances within themselves. They need to,
Right.
maybe focus a little bit more on their nutrition or their exercise. But, it's all generic and based down to just the human condition and to, what we should be doing to survive and to just live our lives. And I think that's why people, categorize themselves as much differently if someone has a mental health condition, as they say, that's not something that I experience or will ever experience. And I think, that's what really needs to change is, you know, changing their perspective of them seeing that they have mental health as well. And it could easily happen to anybody at any time. And you need to be, managing yourself, like you were saying, and managing what you're doing throughout your day and just making sure that you're keeping yourself safe and healthy.
Correct. Yes. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that, like you said, diet, exercise, trying to feel the best you can. I do a lot of writing and journaling that helps, a lot of the things that I do throughout the day not only helps keep me in recovery because I write for publications. I share my story and experiences and hope. But I also, journaling, writing, the things that I do now, we kind of go in phases, I feel. And whether it's, from addiction, and maintaining recovery and my mental health, because I do write for other publications who request, would like me to share. But I educate myself. The more education and reading and learning that we can do just gives us more power and gives us more options and alternatives to continue to grow and to have a happy life while we are maintaining, our mental health. And same with, from addiction, meditating, um, and that. So I'm lucky that everything that I do during the day. For my work side of things, it's usually I'm doing something for my mental health and or for, maintaining my recovery. And, that's important, if you're not, if you're in that, phase where, you don't have to do 90 meetings in 90 days, or you don't have to go to your psychiatrist, once a week, or, and that when you stay well managed, you have that freedom and that flexibility because you are taking care of yourself. And that, so there's loads of things that we can be doing, in just our daily lives every day to help, and increase, how we feel, because everything that I do, directly affects my well-being, both, on the recovery side and my mental health, and like I said, I'm a big advocate of, I never say when I write articles or I speak, at events or whatever, I share my experiences, but it's not due to, it's more to motivate and to inspire people, I don't live in recovery. I maintain my recovery and I'm out there and I try and live my life, and I always go back to that example of, our medical health or whatever, you got heart disease or whatever, we do what we need to do for the conditions, but then we go on and we live our lives, and some of that comes from spiritual, I read the Bible, I am a Christian, and that too is another valuable, resource, if you have a higher power, or of course mine is God and his son Jesus. But, all these different things, there's so many self-help resources that we can do for ourselves each day, to make sure that, our well-being and our happiness is top priority.
Thank you for that. I think that's such a great perspective, Catherine, and it definitely offers some great value into, the mindset that you should have towards yourself and your health. I think it's so important. We spoke a little bit about gambling addiction, but I want you to share a little bit more about it because it definitely is something that does not gain enough attention and awareness about. So could you share some of the misconceptions about gambling addiction and share a little bit more about what you were able to do to overcome that addiction?
Sure. I think probably one of the most important things that I learned, a few years after, when a lot of us, when you maintain recovery, we're going to have speed bumps or roadblocks. But, I feel one of the main things was learning about the cycle. I always say that, addiction is selfish. At the time when we're in full blown addiction, we don't care about anything. We don't feel anything. My gambling was more for escape and coping because the haunting, memories of my childhood and what I went through had resurfaced. And so I was using gambling as an escape to try and cope because I couldn't stuff away the feelings anymore. But I think the main thing that really helped me, I worked with a recovery coach. He was a recovery and life coach and specialist. And I worked with him for a year, and a lot of it was on changing, the thinking, very important, but also learning the cycle of addiction. The cycle is the same from one to the other. Addiction is addiction. It's whatever preference, drugs, alcohol, gambling, porn, whatever. But the cycle is the same, and there's a build up, and then, things happen, and it just you get kind of stuck in this cycle. So learning the tools and the skills to be able to interrupt that cycle was very important. And once I did that, I didn't have any more relapses, and I really started on my way into long-term recovery. But a lot of people don't understand. There's gambling everywhere. Not only when you tell people gambling, it's usually casinos or whatever, but we have such a terrible expansion of tribal Indian casinos everywhere. Um, where I came from, I'm in Arizona right now, the last 4 years, but we moved here from Southern Oregon. And I can tell you the state lotteries in all different states that do have lottery, I got hooked from their video poker machines. And then they added slot style games to those machines. So all I had to do was walk across the street to like a restaurant or a bar, go up the block. There's another place. It's having that access. It's everywhere. And so, the expansion needs to slow down. Right now, our world population, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 2.9% of our world population are problem gamblers right now. 1 in 5 full-blown addicted will try suicide. And, it's now reaching our teens and our college kids, and it's everywhere. I mean, churches, it's in our places of worship. What do they usually do for fundraisers and, harvest festivals? And that bingo is a big popular thing. Go to the grocery store and you're checking out. Usually there's either a machine standing there with lottery tickets, scratchers, or they have them under a plexiglass right there as you're checking out, yeah, see, Gamblers Anonymous, they say that anything that is a risk or chance, even just flipping a coin, is considered gambling. Anything that you can't figure the outcome and is a risk and a chance is gambling. So what do they do in our school systems? They have raffles and, different kinds of things. The school districts in Oregon, where I came from, the Oregon Lottery at Christmas time were doing fundraisers where they would send the teachers like $500 worth of the scratchers, and these kids are all around watching these teachers, and of course it goes to their fund for sports or music, the things that get cut out in school, with less funding, and that's teaching kids how to gamble. I don't think that people really stop and think, how prevalent the gambling options are, everywhere. And for the normal person, the person who can actually go an Indian casino or, a Vegas or Laughlin or Reno, they go for, some fun and entertainment, but there's many who cannot. I don't think gambling should be banned, but I don't think we should be making huge profits. But yet a small, tiny percentage of that goes back for treatment, and it's not enough. So there is a lot of misconceptions. People think it's people who are poor. Well, it's not, because, when I went to my meetings, we had a lawyer in there, we had policemen, firemen. It's all walks of life. It's not just, but the problem I have is, who are they making the profit off of? They're making the profit off the people who are problem gamblers and addicted gamblers, who are going frequently, not your once a month grandma who's going up to play bingo, or the girls every 2, 3, 4 months might go to a casino for a day to have some fun. No, the profits that are being made are being made off of the people who are addicted and who have a problem and that are going often. When I gambled and I was deep within my addiction, I was going 2, 3, 4 times a day. And that, that's addicted gambling. Yeah, there's a lot of misconception, but the thing is, it's still such a silent addiction. It still has such a long way to go as far as raising awareness and letting people understand that it is touching many families. Now it's reaching our teens and high schoolers and college kids with the online sports betting. That's becoming legal, and many states are coming aboard. And letting them have those options. Yeah, there's so many misconceptions about gambling and how easy it is to cross that line into addicted gambling.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. It's definitely eye-opening, and I completely agree. It seems like it's just, there's becoming more access to it, which is definitely the scary thing, that it's so accessible for people of all ages to use and, abuse it. It's definitely something that people need to learn how to, control, and it's definitely something that offers a lot of possibilities for, an addictive habit to take. So it's definitely something that needs more consideration, and it leads to, my next question of, within mental health and gambling addiction, could you share what your hope is for the future in terms of care for those two subjects?
Well, I think really one of the main things, like I said, I think that the landscape needs to change, and it needs to change. Like I said, it needs to come from those important people. Our government, our state and local legislators, and that your medical health and your physical health and your mental and emotional well-being. It needs to start being, the awareness needs to be raised. There's so many different things that they can do that's already in place. You have your state agencies. You have many people who go on state-funded insurance and that. Well, why not advocate to get your physical and a mental health checkup? There's nothing wrong with that. So changing our language and sharing that needs to be one. Definitely, we know there needs to be more funding for mental health, period. How we can get that done. An example, a friend of mine who was riding around America on a bike, one man. He had gotten we've lost count, 70 plus people into free faith-based treatment, rehab, and then treatment programs, all on his own. He was biking around America. After he left here, we had a big event here in Arizona at the state capitol, had news coverage, everything. Well, he got sick as he got into near Texas, Gallup, New Mexico. Well, one of the things that we started was, and I'll just throw it out there, it's something that we're working on with legislators and that for the Fair Recovery Act. And it can easily be done for mental health as well. But what it's going to do is, since the government doesn't want to fund, and quite frankly, we know the government's broke, where our deficit is way out of proportion. So why not come up with ideas outside the box? The Fair Recovery Act. Now, the Fair Recovery Act could be for mental health included as well. Let's start making some of these for-profit, like your big behavioral centers, your treatment centers. Why not have them start taking some accountability? So let's pass a bill where it opens up beds, and it would do a huge impact immediately, and give them free beds. A certain percentage of beds need to be open for people who don't have coverage, or mental health benefits or addiction benefits, or they're not working. They have no money. I think if you're going to get good quality recovery treatment and mental health, then it needs to be in unity, and all the places that are making all these millions of dollars, including pharmaceutical, I think we need to pass a Fair Recovery Act so that if you do not have insurance, or if you don't have the money, but yet high quality, like you see these high-end treatment places, which a lot of these treatment places do include dual diagnosis and mental health behavioral problems. They'll treat both at the same time. So how about we make them accountable and start sharing the wealth and start giving out a portion of your beds to people who have no coverage and have no money and still get the same excellent treatment and courtesy as anyone else that comes off the street. A parent who's just wanting their child to stop doing drugs, but they'll pay the $30,000, for a 2-week stay. I think everybody should have that option. To me, it's only fair. So the Fair Recovery Act would make that happen.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great idea, and it definitely offers, some leniency if people can't afford the care, because that's definitely one of, the biggest problems I think today is, being able to afford the certain care that you need. Is definitely one of the tough.
And we're not asking for any money. There needs to be no funding involved. Just all these centers and places that are making big profits, let's force them to take a little accountability and have some empathy and offer these services for free. We're not asking for a bunch, but just think of how many treatment centers and or behavioral centers that are in the United States alone. If they were to open 5 beds per one, do you know how fast they'd get filled and what an impact that could have right away in battling mental health and addiction?
It would do
that's a huge, yeah. And it wouldn't take any money. We're not asking for funding. We're just asking for a bill to be passed. That's it. And that's what I'm working on currently with
awesome.
Several other people.
That's great to hear. I think that'll definitely offer, some great help for a lot of people, because that access will definitely secure a lot more people to, seek out.
That would give more people hope to reach out and want to get the help.
Exactly.
It is how I feel, right?
I completely agree. Yeah, because then you have that opportunity for people to seek it out, and that's just going to provide, the hope and inspiration that there is, possible change.
That's right. And that they can get the help, and we're putting everybody on a level, playing field. It doesn't matter whether you're homeless. We're going to get you off the street. We're going to get you some help for your addiction, and we're going to help you with your mental health issues. It'd be a big game changer.
It really would be. I definitely agree. I think that's awesome that you're doing that, and I can't wait to hear more as that develops, and we'll definitely have, another interview when that continues to, take place, and we can share
Develop
some information.
Yep.
That would be wonderful. Yeah. So, to wrap things up, I love to ask my guests this question, and it's to put yourself in the position of that you're writing a book for the, everything that you've experienced throughout your life thus far. And I want you to tell me about a chapter within this book, the title, and give us a little glimpse as to why. So the chapter could be about, a lesson or an experience that you had, or, something that you've been able to gain powerful insight from, to leave the audience with at this time.
Well, that's actually kind of an easy question for me because I'm not sure if you knew, I'm sure you do, but I do already have a book out. And I shared all of that about my mental health and how I got to where I was. It's not about how to recover. It's strictly so that people have the insight and to see it, directly, in depth, the roots to why I had turned to gambling and that. And of course, the undiagnosed mental health is included in that. But I would have to say the best chapter is the one. Mine was a little. The book was done. The book is called "Addicted to Dimes: Confessions of a Liar and a Cheat." It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Written, and I use my full name, Catherine Townsend-Lyon. I would say the best chapter is, I believe it's called Baba Black Sheep. And that is where I went in depth about what you and I spoke about earlier about my family. And after I had taken my mental health medications and that, and kind of what transpired after that, and how it made me feel, and the way they were treating me different, and that, I would have to say that would be the best chapter. But I did. A few years in, I decided that I wanted to write and leave something behind for my legacy, to be able to help those who, were recovering from gambling addiction and who have mental health challenges like I do. And it just, to me, like I said, I'm a big raise awareness person, as you know. And so I figured, why not write a book and be able to share all of it, and so others can learn, how, I do talk about how I manage my mental health. I didn't go in depth because I'm writing another book that's almost done that will help people learn how to detect and how to recover and get the help from gambling addiction. That will be my next book. Hoping to have it out by January of 2020. And but yeah, so they can go read all about it through my book Addicted to Dimes. And yeah, that's how I'd answered that question.
Perfect, Catherine. I really appreciate it. And I'll make sure to have the link towards your book and your website below in the show notes, so whoever's listening can make sure that they can seek out that information and resources if they so choose. I definitely recommend it. And I had such a pleasure speaking with you today, Catherine, and I definitely believe we'll have a follow-up interview to continue sharing and speaking about this message, and as well speak about the development of the work that you're doing. And we can share some more insights about the resources that you're helping to provide in such an important and valuable topic that we really need all the support that we can get. So thank you for being on here today, Catherine. I really appreciate you taking the time to be interviewed on the Mental Insights podcast, because it really was such a pleasure to share more of your story and the message that you're really trying to push for others to relate to what you've been able to overcome throughout your life.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on.
It was such a pleasure, Catherine. I appreciate you